Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk. Thank you for joining me for Chapter 6. Let's get right into it. The Holy Book. During the upheaval and terror of the Civil War, many young women were raped and murdered. Sometimes their bodies were left as warnings for everyone to see. Sometimes they were thrown into the river. A close friend of mine from school was taken off the street by soldiers when she was only 13. She was left to die after the attack, but somehow found the strength to make her way home. She was both physically and emotionally brutalized by what had happened, and shock waves skittered through our community. We all knew there would be no justice for the crime. This was war, and our city had become more lawless than a jungle. My family realized they could not be with us girls at all times. As my sisters and I went into the streets to find food, we were very vulnerable to attack. Father and mother were particularly worried about me as I was the smallest because I was weak. I would not be able to defend myself of any sort of attack. In the end, it was my brother Musa who came up with the solution. He discussed it with Papa, and they told me of their plan. A friend of mine is giving karate lessons. I think you should take them, Musa said. My eyes lit up. I loved sports, and the lessons would be a welcome relief from the fearful monotony of life. Fear of the monotony of life. I was a natural athlete despite being small and often sick with colds and headaches as a child. Before the war, I had taken kung fu classes and had excelled. My coach had even spoken of taking me to Asia to train professionally. My parents did not allow me to go, saying I was too young to make such a journey. I had also played for my school in volleyball and basketball and had trained as a gymnast. A friend's father worked at a circus, and he taught me and his daughter. His training enabled me to become very fit and flexible. There was one problem with me starting karate class: lack of money. With the start of the Civil War, there had been an economic crash in my country. Our currency became worthless, and as a result, my father went bankrupt, losing all of his money in one day. He had been a very rich man, and once told us that he had enough to buy 16 houses, but it was all gone. The shock had caused him to have heart pain so severe that the doctors thought he would have a heart attack. Mercifully, he didn't. But his decline in financial circumstances affected him deeply, and he was depressed for a long time. The inheritance he had worked for his whole life to give his children was gone in a moment. My father was not alone in his bankruptcy. Many of our friends and family lost everything too. In our culture, it is expected that the father will buy each of his sons a house when that son marries, while giving each of his daughters a dowry. Before losing everything, Papa had been so focused on the future, building up his fortune to provide for his sons and daughters, that he forgot to live each day at the time. During the war, he could not continue being a lawyer and a philosophy professor. Instead, he tried to find any job to bring him some income into the home. He embraced the time with his family more because he realized we were his true riches. Because Papa had no money, he could not send me to karate, but my brother Musa offered to pay for the classes since, although his business had also crashed, he was being paid by the army. I'm going to take a drink. Drawn to Jesus. 3 days a week, I made a short 5-minute journey to my old school gym where the karate lessons were being held. The classes were for everyone. There were about 50 of us, men, women, and children, and I took to it like a duck to water. The training and being together with friends was a pleasant relief in such hard times, an outlet from the stresses and tensions of war. Most of us in class were Muslim, and we'd often talk about Allah when the class was over. There was a hunger among the people to know more, so we started to discuss the hadith, wanting to learn how to be better Muslims. I think it was because of our spiritual eagerness that at the end of one class, our Muslim karate instructor mentioned he had a children's Bible. "Here it is. It's like a Quran," he said, handing me a beautifully illustrated hardback Bible. He added that many stories in the Quran were also like in the Bible, and he sparked my interest. I turned over the pages and was immediately attracted to the artwork. It was so different than the Quran, which had no illustrations. Although our instructor was a Muslim by birth, he was not a practicing Islam. He made no secret of the fact, and he was searching spiritually. I assume that is why he had a Bible. However, I was still shocked when he so openly told the class about it. I knew the Bible was the holy book of Christians, and they were the infidel. Kafir was the term we used, usually translated as unbeliever or disbeliever, or sometimes infidel. However, I also knew the Bible contained stories about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I wanted to know more about him. My friend and neighbor Rashada, meaning rightly guided, who came to the karate class with me, was as curious as I was to see what the Bible said. She had a worn, tattered New Testament with illustrations in her home. She would smuggle it out of her house so we could read it in the street. "Don't let anyone see," she warned me. "I will be in trouble if my family finds out." I was amazed to learn about Jesus' healing, even raising the dead. I was touched by his miracles, as I knew that Muhammad had not performed any. I began to dream of one day owning a Bible myself. After I started to read the children's Bible, Jesus appeared to me in dreams, showing me that he is the only way to follow. John 14:6. I saw him as a Middle Eastern-looking man in a white robe with a very bright light shining out from him. I can't remember him ever speaking to me in those dreams, but I would wake up with a deep sense of peace. My heart was being gently drawn to Jesus. During the intervals, when we had electricity at home, I flicked through the TV channels and came across American cartoons called the Superbook, Living Book, translated into my language. They were about Jesus, his miracles, and very quickly became my favorite programs. I would sit glued to the TV watching the cartoons' gospel stories. I couldn't get over the signs and wonders of Jesus. Besides the influence of the cartoons and my karate teacher's Bible, something else brought an awareness to Jesus into my life. When I was 13, the Jesus film came to our neighborhood. We heard an announcement that the film was going to be shown in the street below. We were still in the middle of war, but after 3 years of killing, people were so tired of fear and oppression that they were willing to risk their lives for a bit of light relief. We had not been able to go to the cinema because of the war, so the film was a big deal for all of our neighbors. Nearly 200 people attended, sitting on mats and chairs in the street in the early evening before it got dark. It was a big event, a celebration, and everyone was spellbound watching the story of Jesus of Nazareth. We loved watching him become a carpenter and then perform many miracles with his disciples. When I saw Jesus hanging on the cross, I could not stop crying. My family and friends were crying too, because all of us had been touched by the story. After seeing the film, I realized that there was much more to Jesus than I had ever thought. I had so many questions that I went to talk to my father. Papa, Jesus is only a prophet I know, who made the blind see, healed the sick, and made the deaf hear, and the paralyzed walk. He can't only be a prophet. He must be more. Jesus not only raised the dead, he was also raised from the dead himself. His tomb is empty. He is alive. Muhammad's bones are still buried in Mecca, and he is dead. Jesus is my superhero, I said to my father. Father sat back in his chair and smiled at me. Yes, Jesus was one of the greatest prophets even in Islam. We know in the end times he will come from heaven as a judge to judge the world, he replied. When Papa told me Jesus would come again to judge the world, he unknowingly inspired me to learn more about him. He was a prophet, but he was more than that. I wondered. I determined in my heart to search out the answer that would satisfy me. The miracles of Jesus had captured me, and I would not walk away until I knew for sure who he was. My father was not angry that I had been looking at the Bible. He had read it himself. Being a well-educated man, he approved of my inquiring mind. Had he known my searching would lead me to leave Islam, he would have forced me to stop right then. I believe that concludes chapter 6, and I will see you again on chapter 7. I apologize for bad narrating, but I'm so glad that you're here with me. Tell your friends, your family about this channel so it can grow, and therefore I can do more with this channel. Until then, I'll see you in chapter 7. Bye.